Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning. It's great to see everybody interacting. As we know, we're at this community of practice. Interaction is where the learning occurs. And through that interaction, we build our skills and build our learning. But also the networking. Those people around the room who you're talking to right now are your expanded network, working outside of the individual and outside of your team to expand your network and so you have greater resources. So it's my honor to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Summit on Performance Management Excellence. I'm just going to move the mic back just a little bit. I'm Scott Sabella, and welcome to Maine. As a younger guy, visited Maine numerous times, but I haven't been back since I was probably 13, and I just remember the wonderful people, the wonderful country, and just the beautiful coastal areas. So if you get a chance, get out and enjoy that. And also, I developed my lobster roll addiction when I was here, when I was younger, if anybody's familiar. And those that are landlocked, if you're not familiar with a lobster roll, it's like a New England hot dog, but it's a roll with butter. Yeah, people are shaking their heads now. So it's a hot dog roll with a little butter, sometimes sometimes fried roll, and then fresh lobster meat, sometimes warm, usually cold, served with some chips on the side, and if you're lucky, coleslaw. So treat yourself to that if you get a chance. But again, welcome to the 12th Annual Summit, and thanks to the host of the summit, the Maine Department of Labor, Maine Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, which includes Maine Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Division for Blind and Visually Impaired. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of the on behalf of the Summit Navigators, which are a small group of individuals who help guide the summit group in practice. And you need a group of dedicated individuals that help some of the administrative things behind the scenes and just help drive the group forward. But the community of practice is you guys. You make up the community. And as I mentioned, this is a community of practice is learning through interaction with others. It's people with a like need, purpose and concern, and an urgency. And through the interaction, they learn how to do their jobs better. And in this case, program evaluation, quality assurance, and continuous improvement in your agencies. And this forum, this is a unique opportunity. This conference and this community is uniquely for you. There is no other conference that is for program evaluation and quality assurance and state VR, for what you do on your jobs on a daily basis. And look around, these are the people, these are your peers. This is your network. So reach out to them, interact, build that network. There's a higher purpose in program evaluation beyond just the necessary evil associated with running an agency and compliance. Program evaluation helps an agency figure out if they're spending their time helps figure out if what you're spending on your time on is worthwhile. It helps if you're making efficient, you decide if you're making an efficient use of your resources. Program evaluation can be an act of advocacy for your program and for individuals with disabilities. Having data shows that you're basing your decisions not just on good intentions, but on data and evidence and what is best for your program and for people with disabilities. Data helps support your argument for advocacy. And it's your argument for advocacy no matter if you're making an argument for services for someone with disabilities, whether you're making an argument for your program resources with your state legislature, or trying to make an argument to federal government about the need for the VR program. Program evaluations helps you support that argument. And we all know that there's increasing accountability demands, and that coming from state and federal government, and it's just kind of growing more and more, and the complexity grows every year, and how are you going to navigate that? I mean, it's inevitability that we must provide data now, and we must be accountability and show accountability. And navigating the systems are difficult. There's many challenges in VR. There's many complexities. There's WIO regulation changes, new rounds of unified and combined state plans, first year of negotiated targets for performance measures, RSA 107 monitoring is always there, joint requirements for program accountability, changes in reporting requirements and systems. But the urgency is there, but you're not alone. There are resources out there. You have you're an individual and you have your team. Your team at your organization is your most important resource, of course. Those are the people that you work with every day. And you should have gratitude for those people. But there's an expanded network outside of that. And again, look around this room and network with these people. Introduce yourself and build and expand your network. So we're on our 12th conference, and just a brief history around the summit. Back around 12 years ago, Michael Shoemaker was hired by another person that's joined us in the room, Kyle Walker, and the old executive director for Utah State Office of Rehabilitation, Don Uchida. And Don was pretty politically savvy and was always trying to get ahead of RSA monitoring. And throughout the monitoring reports back then, you could see themes. They didn't tell you what the emphases were going to be back in those days, but you could look through the reports and you kind of could gather what the themes were that they were focusing on. And one of those back then was quality assurance. That was language was through all of the monitoring findings and the corrective actions and recommendations, you know, the language that those 107 reports have. And I wanted to get ahead of this, so I asked Michael to find out what he could about quality assurance and what other agencies were doing. So he made contacts with Brian Hickman in Wyoming, and then he started making contacts and called 10 other people, other agencies, and find out what they were doing around quality assurance and program evaluation. And he recorded those calls, and he learned a lot from them. And through that, one of the things he learned was there's no forum for people to talk about program evaluation and quality assurance in state VR agencies. And people don't, there's very few resources, and people don't know the other people in other agencies that are doing this. They don't even know who those people are. So he had the idea to bring the summit together, to bring together the collection of people that are doing program evaluation, quality assurance in state agencies, and see if they could share what they're doing and try and build quality assurance and continuous improvement in state agencies. So through that process, some of the other technical assistance agencies got involved. I was directing one of the TASE centers. We were working on technical assistance and quality assurance, and it just made a match. And that first summit happened in Salt Lake City in 2008, and there were 47 people there, and 15 states were represented. And then the next year, we hosted in Denver, and it was about the same size, and then RSA helped with funding in the third year in a cooperative project, and it just blew up. And we've maintained and just been on a roll since. And I think some of the reason is that you guys are driving it, but it's the urgency and the need and the need to figure out what other agencies are doing and build your professional development and improve your agencies. Okay, so I didn't have an update, but thank you. Michael Shoemaker just pointed out that we have 187, which if we look, it's the second highest attendee number that we've had. So let's have a round of applause for that. So what that shows is that the urgency is still there. Whether you're a new person coming in and are just trying to find your way, or you're dealing with the existing problems and the new problem solving and the new challenges associated with WIO and everything that happens in your agencies. But that need is still there and it's still urgent. So I just want to leave you with a couple things. One being, remember that this is your forum, and it is through the interaction and engagement with others is how you're going to learn, how you're going to share tools, how you're going to find resources for yourself, how you're going to build your network. You're having challenges down the road throughout the year. You can call so-and-so because they're doing something similar or dealing with the same challenge. That's how you build your network outside of your agency. You have your team, your core team, but build your resources outside of your agency. So introduce yourself to others, interact, share, learn, build your network. And I just want to mention one more thing before I leave today. And I'm just going to read this aloud. And in the spirit of networking and building community in our Summit Group community of practice, I want to thank Michael Shoemaker and recognize him for his enduring contribution to the Summit Group, which, as I described earlier, we wouldn't be here without his efforts. Michael's been a leader in building the community of practice, first in reaching out to other program evaluators and state VR agencies, and building a small network of program evaluation specialists, then in putting together the first annual Summit Group conference in Salt Lake City, then being instrumental in the development of what is now the Summit Group. Most of all, he's been an inspirational leader for the Summit Group for 12 years, using his natural disposition of positivity and community. Michael has always had an affinity for focusing on higher purpose messages and a gift for communicating a vision that can be transformational for those who are lucky enough to be involved. So as you see Michael in the hallway or in a session, if you can give him a high five and just say thanks for his efforts in the community of practice. And I'm going to plagiarize from Michael now, but the best is yet to come, and we just have an award for Michael that we'd like to present to him. So, all right, thanks everyone. I'm going to call up Christine Robinson and Karen Frazier.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Robinson from the Maine Bureau of Rehab Services, Director of Quality Assurance. Welcome to the first full day of the summit. Welcome to the beautiful state of Maine. I wanted to just briefly introduce the host state committee. Later in the program, we'll be introducing the entire planning committee. There was a group from across the country that worked for the past year to pull this event together, so I'm very excited to see it come to fruition. Some of the folks I'm introducing are in the room, others are working at the registration table, but just wanted to let you know who's been involved from the state of Maine. First of all, to my right, Karen Frazier, Director of the Maine Bureau of Rehab Services. I need a cheat sheet, just so I don't forget anybody. Annette Stevens, a consultant for the Division for Blind and Visually Impaired. I think she is there. Okay, good. Samantha Fenderson, Assistant Director for the Division of Voc Rehab. Peter Diplock, Assistant Director for the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Libby Stone Sterling, Director of the Division of Voc Rehab. Brenda Drummond, Director of the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And again, Karen Frazier, Director of the Bureau of Rehab Services. And Karen, I'll head the podium off to you.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Portland, Maine. It's wonderful to look out over this room, and I'm actually seeing a whole lot of faces I recognize. And I was reflecting back when I realized the 12th annual summit, and when Scott was talking about like need, purpose, urgency. I didn't go to the first summit. I started to join the group in the second event, I think was Denver. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I've found my people. Because just as Scott reflected, you know, you're off in your agencies doing your work. You're paying attention to quality assurance. You want to do well with the services that we're delivering to people with disabilities. You're dealing with a whole lot of regulations and reporting and all that, and there's no one else in your agency that you can talk to about that. So I just cannot believe that it's been 12 years. What I've found over the years, I haven't been able to attend every summit. I've been to a lot. We've been very involved in a lot of planning, so we were super excited to bring it to Maine. But what I have found over the years is it does offer you an opportunity to reflect. It also, for me, very concretely would bring things back to my home agency. You know, one year we were working on case review, and we got some great tools. So I'm very hopeful for all of you who are here over the next 2 days that too will be your experience. Great group of wonderful people all working together with a common mission. So I did want to take a minute just to also thank some of our sponsors for the conference. So we've got Market Decisions. We can thank for the Continental Breakfast. We have our pen, coffee out there. Very helpful for most of us. And also Alliance Enterprises. Many of our states use Aware, and they're behind the scenes, so they also contributed to sponsoring the conference. So with that, I'm looking forward to introducing Laura Fortman, who is the Commissioner of the Department of Labor, my boss. So I'm on my best behavior, everybody know. And Laura just was confirmed as the Department of Labor Commissioner this January. So she was previously, though, our commissioner between 2003 and 2011. So we were super excited to have her come back. And one of the best things about Laura is she really understands the work that we do. She is greatly supportive of the employment and independent living of people with disabilities. So as the commissioner, she leads the state-wide department's work to help employers recruit and train a talented workforce, I would say, with disabilities, provide workers with the skills that they need, assist individuals when jobs are lost, ensure safe and fair workplaces, and it also supports research employment data, which is, as Scott also talked about, super critical to the work that we do. She's been a senior executive on both the federal and state level, working to protect the rights of workers and ensure that they have access to jobs that allow them to support themselves and their families. She celebrated the legacy of the former Labor Secretary Frances Perkins, that may ring a bell for some people in this room, who led the way for the Fair Labor Standards Act to be enacted. And Laura was the executive director of the Frances Perkins Center in Damariscotta from 2011 to 2013. As the executive, she's cut me off. All right, she's just awesome. So please welcome Laura Fortman.
It's like, thank you so much, Karen, and it's like we'd run out in the morning if, and really, and I don't know if you know this or you picked up on this, but 12 years ago, Karen was the person who was responsible for quality assurance in the agency. And the fact that she is now the bureau director, I think also demonstrates how important data is to that bureau and to our department. So we are incredibly lucky and thrilled that we have talented staff like Karen leading the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So thank you, Karen, for all that you do. You've already been welcomed to Maine several times this morning, but I'm going to throw in my pitch there too as well. And in addition to lobster rolls, and I would say they are nothing like hot dogs, we also have a, it's a great place to kind of live and work. Right now, Maine, like many of your states, has a very low unemployment rate and a tight labor market. So enjoy your time while you're here and be thinking about, it really is a great place to work, and that there are plenty of job opportunities. And I know everyone in the Bureau of Voc Rehab who is here today would be happy to talk to you about opportunities that we have even within that bureau as well as throughout the state. So please keep that in mind. One of the things that when we think about data, and I, like all of you, think that that is incredibly important as we make decisions, is that data is not just, and you know this, it's not just numbers, it's people. And so when I was thinking about today, and I was, Karen talked about our responsibility in terms of job seekers, but there were nationally in 2015 about 482,000 job seekers with disabilities who are looking for work. And one of the things that we're trying to do here in Maine is make sure that every person in the state who is looking for work has the resources that they need in order to be supported in those jobs. And our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services is critical in performing that function. And on a weekly basis, folks in the Bureau share stories with me of people who have found work recently. And one of those was a man named Michael. He came to our Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services unemployed and experiencing depression and physical health issues. And our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation supported him to participate in vocational assessment, addressed his transportation needs, and helped him get fitted for unions. Michael was then offered a full-time career as an electrician, making $25 an hour. Another example is a man called Jorge, who was a veteran with disabilities. And with support from vocational rehab, he was hired as the head of a manufacturing for a large company, making pontoons for seaplanes. And he told us that he is loving every minute of his new career because his job now is directly connected to his passion for aviation and computers. And he's a salary of $55,000 a year to start. These are just two stories about people who have participated in our programs over the summer. And if you don't have a chance to, I don't know if Libby's going to be talking about this or not, but one of the programs that we're also especially excited about is the work that we're doing with young people. There was a program this summer that was held on the college campus at the University of Maine. It gave young people with autism an opportunity to try out some college courses as well as work on campus. And the enthusiasm, the excitement that they had was amazing. And the opportunities, the life that they saw for themselves was one filled with hope and aspirations. And that's what we want for every person and every young person. We want them to be able to achieve their goals, their aspirations, not just because it's the right thing for them, but it's also absolutely critical for our state to thrive. So I'm excited to be here today, and I'm particularly excited to be introducing the keynote speaker. I think many of you are aware of Eve Hill's long history of advocacy for people with disabilities. And she has an incredible career, including she started out as the executive director of the Disability Rights Legal Center at Loyola Law School. She was the District of Columbia's first director for the Office of Disability Rights. She was a senior vice president at the Institute of Syracuse University, where she was responsible for the Institute's work on the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, I first met Eve while she was serving at as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and I was working at the U.S. Department of Labor. During her time at Justice, she was responsible for oversight of the division's disability rights enforcement, educational rights enforcement, and she was also part of the negotiating team for the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. She's testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to support ratification of the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Part of her enforcement portfolio, though, was implementing the Olmsted community integration requirements for employment and education. And that's where we met. So I was at the Department of Labor, and we were working on what we thought was this really, really good, important piece of legislation that expanded minimum wage and overtime protections to direct care workers. Sounds perfectly reasonable, right? This is a good thing. And then we started getting questions about what we were doing from people in the disability rights community who were saying things like, what impact is this going to have on people with disabilities who need to have direct care professionals helping them? And over at the Department of Labor, we're saying, huh? What are you talking about? And so we started working closely with our partners over at the Department of Justice to figure out how can we do both things. These are two right things. It's not like one thing is right and one isn't. So how do we make sure, as we're developing policy and implementing it, that we are really looking holistically at it and involving people who have expertise in different areas across bureaus, across agencies, to come up with the best possible plan, always keeping the person we're trying to serve at the center of it. And so Eve patiently, and I use that word loosely, strenuously advocated on behalf of people with disabilities as we were implementing this regulation. And so the folks at the U.S. Department of Labor became way more familiar than we ever thought we would need to be with the Olmsted Act. And I believe the folks at the Department of Justice came to a new appreciation for things around labor standards that they didn't know. But I think together, you've heard today already the importance of partnership, of networking, of listening to each other, learning from each other to expand our own expertise, always keeping the people we're trying to serve at the center of it. So I am grateful to Eve for helping to teach me the importance of not only intellectually understanding the concepts of inclusion, but making sure that as I approach my work, that we put those concepts and principles at the center of what we do, which is why the Maine Department of Labor is incredibly committed to competitive, integrated employment, to making sure that there are opportunities for all people in our state. And by all people, we really mean all people. So with that, I would like to introduce a passionate advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, someone who understands policy at all levels, and somebody that I hope I can refer to as a friend, as a former colleague, and as someone I am thrilled to bring here, and she's also a Mainer. So welcome home, Eve, and thank you so much for being here.
So I burst out laughing when she said I patiently explained something. I'm not a patient person. So I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you all so much for having me. As Laura said, I'm a Maine girl, and so I grew up in Appleton and Union. And although I've lived in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, California, which, aren't that much different, I'm a Maine girl. So I'm really proud. when I see the news from Maine, and Mainers are like responding to the crises that everybody's facing around the country with such goodness, like reaching out to migrants and inviting them into the community and helping young people pay their loans and finding ways, these are related, to care for our elders as we face a provider crisis, and banning styrofoam. Although at the time I said, wait a minute, I was advocating to ban styrofoam here when I was 12. What do you mean they didn't do it? I thought that was done. They built an accessible boat launch at Hosmer Pond in Camden, where I'm staying. Yes. And then getting everybody jobs in the community, because it's about everybody. So, and just the reason that Scott's going to get so much ribbing about the lobster roll hot dog is because Maine also has the best hot dogs in the world. And just a little plug here, Wass's Hot Dogs in Rockland and Belfast. Got to do it. Right up there with the lobster roll. So I've been a civil rights lawyer for a million years. It seems like I can't keep a job, but staying more or less in the same area. So 25 years of that. And the bulk of my work has been enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 and the Olmstead decision. But I've pushed for physical accessibility, access to the internet, equal opportunity in education and voting and healthcare and housing and just everything. But the most transformative thing that I've pushed for in my career is equal access to employment for people with disabilities, because from that flows the other things. Doesn't matter if the restaurant has a ramp, if I don't have a job because I can't afford to go there. It doesn't really matter if the internet is accessible to me because I can't buy a computer to access it. The doorway of employment is the doorway to really using all the civil rights, all the access, all the pieces of life for anybody. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you because you are the real civil rights heroes for people with disabilities. So you may not have thought of yourself as civil rights heroes, but you are. Let me tell you why. You already know this. Our jobs are one of the most important aspects of our lives. I personally spend a ton of time at my job every week. We spend all that time there. Our jobs make it possible for us to raise our children, buy our homes, support our families, and contribute to our communities. And a huge percentage of us meet our spouses at our jobs. I know there are all these rules against doing that, but it still is happening. So big impact on our lives. So equal opportunity in all the other aspects of life largely depends on having a job. And all the civil rights lawyers, much as I think we are superheroes, and all the judges and all the researchers and all the lawmakers in the world can't get anybody a job. We can theorize about it, we can establish precedents, we can research evidence-based practices, but you and the people you work with can turn those things into a job. It's magic, it's like alchemy. I can take lead and turn it into gold. So you make those things real in the world. And every time you do that for a client, you change the world. This is no small thing. You change that person's life. You change that person's family's life. You change the lives of that person's bosses and colleagues and friends, and you change that person's community, all for the better. So one client is a world. When I started in this, and I know that this is working, it's working! When I started in this field a million years ago, I did a lot of trainings, and I would often ask my audience, raise your hand if you know somebody with a disability, and a few hands would go up. Well, I don't even ask that question anymore, because now when I ask that question, everybody's hands go up. Why is that? You deserve credit for that. People with disabilities are out in the world now. We are at school. We are on the bus. We are in the taxi. We are on the street in a good way. We are in our shops. We are in our communities. We are at work. And that community inclusion and visibility of people with disabilities happened as a result of the work that you do, because being out there feeds into more acceptance of us being out there and of people expecting us to be out there. And that has an impact on the attitudes of everyday people everywhere. So young people today think about people with disabilities differently than young people did just 10 years ago. Young people think, I know what that means. That's my friend Joe. He's got the disability. And they notice when people with disabilities aren't there. So too often the transition for everybody from school to work results in all those people with disabilities disappeared, where'd they go? And we didn't used to ask that question. But my friends' children and grandchildren say, wait a minute, where'd Joe go? Where are the people with disabilities here? They notice. And when you notice, you can do something about it. So people with disabilities are visible in ways that we never were before. And now we know that we're valuable. And we're not going to be quiet anymore. And we won't go back. So a big part of that is a shift, explicitly incorporated into the ADA, that said, this is not charity, this is about rights, this is about fairness. It's not about feeling sad for me, it's not about helping me, it's not about giving me a dime. It's about fairness, and it's about value. So the disability rights movement says, our differences do not make us less, they make us more. I once told an employer, really, problem solving is what you most need in your employees? I got a guy with a disability solves 20 problems before he gets to work in the morning. You want people who can solve problems. He got on the inaccessible bus, he got here, he got over your stupid, crappy ramp. You know, those were problems, and he solved them. We can use that. So research has shown, over and over now, that diversity of perspective, approach, and background brings these huge benefits to the workforce. It's not touchy-feely, crunchy granola, pie in the sky. Wow, I used a lot of cliches in one sentence. It's called the diversity bonus. If you're solving complex tasks, you objectively reach better results. There was math to prove this. When you bring together diverse cognitive abilities, you get better answers. And those cognitive abilities are diverse because of people's race, gender, age, disabilities and capabilities, and sexual orientation. All of that brings diversity, which brings better problem solving. So people with disabilities rightly say, don't hire us because you feel bad for me. God, I don't want to work for you if you feel bad for me. Hire us because you need us. And the ADA then says, we recognize that people with disabilities have different needs from people without disabilities. And that's not inherent to the disability. So not very many lawyers with disabilities, not many lawyers who are wheelchair users. Guess what? Using a wheelchair has no impact on your ability to be a good lawyer. None. What's keeping people who use wheelchairs from being lawyers? Stairs. Well, that's a stupid thing to keep people out of an entire career that they could be good at. So the ADA says, okay, yeah, we built those stairs. Those stairs arose out of an assumption that we had that people with disabilities weren't going to be here. So we built a world that doesn't let them be here. So that assumption that we made that they wouldn't be here, we then concretized, literally, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. So We built it so because people weren't going to be here, and so now they can't be here for something unrelated to their capabilities, unrelated to the value that they bring to work, unrelated to really anything except what we assumed. So the ADA said, okay, those different needs that people with disabilities have, a big part of them are based on assumptions that turn out to be wrong. People with disabilities are everywhere. You all know us. And they should be able to come out and do work and participate in the community. And these barriers that came from our assumptions, we have an obligation to take them down. The people with disabilities shouldn't have to be Superman, shouldn't have to be able to leap tall buildings or tall sets of stairs or assumptions about whether they could see or hear or talk. We have an obligation to take some of those barriers down. So that's where the reasonable accommodation requirement comes from. Okay, you built it, you had an assumption, you thought people would be in institutions and out of sight, out of mind, so people with disabilities shouldn't bear the whole burden of taking care of that, unbuilding that assumption. We all will contribute to unbuilding that assumption. So, but there's more, huh? I would say, so people say to me, oh, but it's so different. This isn't really civil rights, this is reshaping the whole world, this is putting a burden on employers, this is da-da-da-da-da. And I say, no. We've done this before. I remember it. When I first started, oh God, I'm so old. When I first started as a lawyer, my law firm hired me for my summer associate position, and they said, well, we had to think a lot about this, really hard, thought about not hiring but you, because we don't have a lawyer's bathroom for women. And I'm like, really? Our society had failed to build itself with the assumption that women were going to be in the workplace or in the sports stadium or behind the microphone as a sportscaster and all these things. So, mining operations didn't have restrooms for women. Law firms apparently didn't have restrooms for women. Colleges and universities didn't have restrooms for women. We had built in this assumption that women weren't going to be there, that we built it, and now they can't be there. So this self-fulfilling prophecy just goes round and round and round until we say, oh yeah, our assumption was wrong. Let me unbuild that assumption. That's what we're doing here too. Our assumption was wrong. We need to unbuild that assumption. But the ADA, I hate to say this, the ADA doesn't change the world enough or quickly enough for some people with disabilities. The ones who really challenge our assumptions. The ones with significant disabilities. The ones we really thought and told and enforced, you won't be able to work. The ones whose, OBGYN pediatrician always said, oh, your child will never be able to work. Those are the people that need a little bit more than a reasonable accommodation. And that's where VR comes in. You're breaking down the big barriers, the big assumptional barriers, the big cost barriers, the things that are beyond what the ADA requires of employers. So we as a society have committed again to provide support for people with significant disabilities to overcome the assumptions for them that were built in and are still built in. These assumptions are still out there. We're going to tear down even some of those big barriers, and that's heroic. And that's what you all do. That's what VR agencies do across this country, tear down the big barriers. So Martin Luther King said, I'm going to quote Martin Luther King. This is civil rights stuff. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, I'm very concrete, so when I hear that remark, I picture that arc crossing the room from this corner to this corner. And what I ask my audiences to do is reach up, come on, do it, yank that arc closer. That's what you're doing. You are dangling off that arc every day, pulling it closer to justice for people with disabilities. We're all doing it. I dangle from it repeatedly during the day. So, bending the arc. That arc lets us, people with disabilities, contribute to our jobs, our families, and our communities, and it lets us be fairly paid for our work. So we also can have full lives. So we also can buy stuff and contribute to the economy, raise kids, get married, buy a car, an American-made car, why not? Make a house a home, all these things that then leverage out, ripple out into the world and make good things happen. So some people come into the disability service professions and think it's charity. We're helping people get jobs. It's nice, it's so nice. I've had people say to me, clearly who had just met me, "Oh, you're so sweet." I'm like, oh my God. Let me just go with that for a minute. And I almost always go, oh no, I'm not sweet. I'm mad. I'm righteously outraged. I am not sweet. I'm not doing it because it's nice. I'm not doing it because it's the right thing to do. I appreciate that it's the right thing to do. But I'm mostly doing it because, oh, for heaven's sake. I used to have these conversations with my mother who would say, she would say blah, 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 whatever. And I would say, that's not fair. Stamping my feet. And she would say, well, what are you going to do? The world's not fair. And I would say, fix it. And so that's what we're doing. World's not fair. Well, that's not an answer. We're going to fix it. We're recognizing that people with disabilities shouldn't have to be superheroes in order to just have a regular job. And we're helping them not have to be superheroes to do that. There will be no more inspiration porn based on, ooh, that a person with a disability has a job. Ooh. We're just helping people with disabilities get over the really big barriers that were unfairly put in their way to getting a regular job. And then we're helping employers recognize that people with disabilities bring value to your workplace. So I'm a little anti-charity. No, you can't speak. You may have noticed. I have bought completely into the no pity mantra of the disability community. We can't rely on charity. It doesn't feel good to get it, for one thing. The pat on the head, okay, we'll let you in, little lady. But mostly we can't rely on it. Charity is a really weak reed to try and build your life on. First, donors cut out charity the first time finances get tight. So you don't want to build your life based on something that people will need to cut first when they lose their job. And then charity may keep you alive, but it is not going to support you to blossom, to really take it on, to really build yourself. And it's really not going to allow you to challenge the so-called common knowledge that you can't work. Your pediatrician said so. We can't invest that much in someone who's probably not going to really be able to work. That's where charity draws the line. Okay, I'll keep you alive. I'm not going to let you be a full person. It's not possible. So sometimes I know that doing this work can feel like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill and it rolls back down the next day. But that's because the world doesn't change easily. You're not just getting one person a job, you're changing the world. It's gonna fall back on you, crush you underneath it periodically. And then you need a vacation to Maine and a Wass's hot dog and a lobster. But it doesn't change that easily because prejudice is alive and well. And that's what we're all really combating now, is prejudice. Now, prejudice, unfortunately, changing prejudice is a one person at a time, all day, every day endeavor. You can't do it by yourself. You can't do it you know, okay, I feel good enough to do challenge prejudice today, maybe not tomorrow. But we know that prejudice is out there and that it's affecting people with disabilities, and that is largely the real thing that's undermining disability employment. We know this because of the data. In 2017, the employment rate in Maine, because I cared about Maine, was the employment rate for working age people with disabilities, 32.9%, which is up from 32%. Yay. But the employment rate of working age people without disabilities in Maine is 81.9, 82%. So 49 percentage point gap, wow. And then when you look at full-time, full-year employment in Maine, people with disabilities are employed full-time, full-year at a 20% rate, 20.4, as compared to 60.7. Still, big gap. And annual earnings reflect that. People with disabilities median annual earnings are $38,600, which is actually way up from the past 4 years. But it compares to $45,500 for people without disabilities. $7,000 a year. What can you do? I could buy a car with $7,000. And annual household income for households with a person with a disability is $46,500 compared to $67,700. And working age people with disabilities are in poverty at a rate of 26.6% compared to 9.1% of people without disabilities. So this is really happening. This is really affecting people. But nearly all these numbers are improved over the past 4-year period. So you are bending the arc. It is changing the world. But I just said all that was due to prejudice. And some of you thought, is it really due to prejudice? And I say, I think so. And the reason we know that is because the numbers are not good, but the numbers improved in a year. So what changed in that year? Did the people with disabilities change? Did you create some fabulous job skills training program that I haven't heard about? That suddenly made unqualified people with disabilities qualified for these jobs? Yes? No? Okay, so the numbers changed. The people with disabilities didn't change. What changed was employers needed workers. And so they said, fine, I'll try that guy. And that person's doing the job. He or she was always qualified. The reason he or she couldn't get the job was because employers thought, ooh, a little worried about that disability thing. That's prejudice. The reason you can see a change is because they had to. So that's why I like law as well as economic changes, because it makes people have to do things. And when you give people with disabilities a shot, they can do it. So what changed in 2017 is, in the face of a greater need for workers, employers gave people with disabilities a shot, and they took it. So you're combating prejudice. But what I've learned, and it only took me 25 years, is that when you're talking to people about their prejudice, it's not effective to call them prejudiced. When you call a judge an ableist, they stop listening to you. So, but you can challenge their assumptions. And you all are and the people you work with are in unique positions to do just that. You have these great tools. You have stories. You have Laura's stories. You have Karen's stories. You have stories about how this happened and what a difference it made. So my story is about Lewis. I worked on an ADA Olmsted case in Rhode Island about sheltered workshops. They were very heavily reliant on sheltered workshops. And almost no one went into competitive integrated employment. They went straight from school, where they practiced sheltered workshop skills, into the sheltered workshop. It was great. So we found that violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. We negotiated a consent decree. They started shifting resources and people out of workshops and into competitive integrated employment. And Lewis's mom, Lori, called me Boy, was she mad. She said, "You are upsetting Lewis's whole life." I tried competitive integrated employment. It didn't work. And so I've got Lewis in a sheltered workshop. He is safe there. He is happy there. He is productive. How can you do this to us? So Lewis had a serious verbal motor function disability, and he was largely nonverbal. And he was diagnosed with an intellectual disability, which I'm not sure was correct. So she had done this before. It didn't work out. He had been in the sheltered workshop for 3 years. It was all good. Our life was manageable. But as Rhode Island started to change the workshops and move people into competitive integrated employment, Lori said, okay. Lewis said, sure, I'll try it. We'll try it. We'll try it again one more time. I'm holding you responsible, Eve. So Lewis got a job in the Human Resources Department at a state hospital. And it turns out he has mad computer skills. He could beat the crap out of me at War of the Worlds. Not that anybody couldn't beat me at War of the Worlds. But he is an Excel user. Who does that in their spare time? Lewis. And putting the backs on earrings in the sheltered workshop was not using his skills. But they never found out about what he could do. So they didn't get him a job doing that. So he now works full-time, is in the union, and has full benefits. He makes, for a little while, he made a little bit more than one of the lawyers working on his case. It was fine, we gave her a raise. He has his own office. He wears a collared shirt and a tie to work every day. And Lori called me later to apologize and thank us. And then she joined the board of directors of the supported employment provider that works with Lewis. So I have Lewis's story. I have the story of Q, who was another man in Rhode Island with an intellectual disability who was stuck in a sheltered workshop for 8 years. And when I met Q, he didn't speak, just did not speak. And when Rhode Island started transitioning people out of the workshops, they used the discovery process. And it revealed that Q really liked cars. So he got a job in an auto mechanics in a garage. And it turned into a sort of job carve. So the mechanics were spending a lot of their time cleaning stuff up, putting tools away, organizing things, looking for things that were not organized. And it wasn't related to their work on the cars, which is what they were hired to do, what they were paid to do. So Q took over all those jobs. Organizing the tools, making sure everything was put back where it belonged, cleaning up, and so forth. And that improved performance for everybody. His boss called right away and it was like, oh my goodness, we put this new thing in where we put tape on the tools that says where they go. Q is putting them all back where they go. We can find things almost every time. It's saving so much time. So that improved the system for everybody, and then his system made everybody more efficient. So Q got to start taking on more tasks. And when I last saw him at work, he was rotating tires. And the last time I saw him at all, he was at a conference speaking to 200 people about that experience. So the leveraging, the rippling, the building of each thing that we do, not me, but y'all, is amazing. And Q bought a bed. He'd had a really old bed, and got a dog, and had a real life. So, and then you can just ask Walgreens how hiring people with disabilities made a difference in their distribution centers, where they reduced accidents by 30%, and they reduced absenteeism by 30%. And I had the finance guy for Walgreens come to a conference, and all he talked about was numbers. He's like not a disability guy. He's just talking about the numbers. And it seemed to me, I'm not good at numbers. I'm a lawyer, I don't do math. That's what experts are for. And he said, our attrition rate was so high, I thought, doesn't that mean everybody leaves and some people leave twice? It was so high. And it had dropped by like 80%. So people are now staying. And that's a big issue for employers, is keeping people once you get them doing the job. So this was a huge benefit for them. And it had also helped the other employees. They were working safer. They weren't hurting themselves. They weren't breaking the materials. And everybody was doing a more effective job. And it became a no whining zone. So we had better morale for everybody. So we can prove with our stories, our actual experiences, that when an employer thinks a person with a disability can't do X, we can tell them, oh yeah, we don't know that they can't do X. And the only way to figure out if they can do X is try X. And VR can make it safe for the employer to let this person try X and see how it turns out. So the other tool we have is data. As I talked about earlier, the employment numbers and earnings for people with disabilities are going up. They're getting jobs. They're doing the jobs. Those industries that they're working with have not collapsed in 2 years. Must be working out okay. The numbers haven't gone back down again. They didn't all get fired, unlike the federal government. Different story. And another little tidbit, nationally, people with disabilities are overrepresented in self-employment. 10% of people with disabilities versus 6% of people without disabilities. So, do business owners with disabilities have lower expectations? I don't think so. What they do have is a willingness to make accommodations. I will accommodate myself very, very well. And your final tool in combating stigma and making equal employment opportunity real is the resources that the federal government and the state government have committed to breaking down these big barriers. VR is the best resource an employer has. So I go out to LA in 19, and this recent law graduate who's blind comes to me and says, I can't get a job, no one will hire me. Will you hire me? And I said, sure. How much do I have to pay you? And so I hired him, and VR comes in and says, oh, we'll give you JAWS. We'll give you a computer with more memory to put JAWS on. We'll give you this and that. I said, no, I'll buy the computer. I was gonna buy the computer anyway, but they brought all this stuff to the table. And I said, bonus? Well, yeah, sure, I'll take that. So as an employer, I'm thrilled. It didn't cost me anything, and I got a great employee. And he did all my outreach. I virtually didn't have to speak to anybody ever again. But I, having been in the disability rights field for 6 years by that point, did not know what VR did. No clue. So we are marketing VR to people with disabilities and their families, but I'm not sure we're marketing to employers. And they need to know. So like last year, I helped do a report on employment of people with disabilities for the National Council on Disability, and I interviewed lots of groups in, I don't know, it was like 14 states in 2 weeks. It was insane. But interviewed a bunch of groups in Oregon, including a statewide association of manufacturers that I had never heard of, and it turns out there's one in every state. They were bemoaning the difficulty of finding workers. I can't find workers, I can't find workers, this is our big thing now, I gotta find workers. And I said, well, there's a group of workers with disabilities. The states really prioritized them because we sued Oregon too. And they've got resources in it. I feel very effective some days. It's not as often as I'd like, and they're putting resources into it, and we know where the people are, and can I introduce you? And so they said, well, really? Like, yeah. And they said, well, but, a lot of our members can't afford to provide job coaches. I'm like, well, who said you had to do that? There are services that'll do that. We have that. It's in the settlement agreement. And they were shocked again. And they said, well, some of our jobs require training. I'm like, cool, because on-the-job training and coaching are cornerstones of supported employment. It's in the settlement. And they said, cool. And they said, well, some of our jobs are complicated and dangerous. And I said, well, number one, don't assume that we can't do complicated and dangerous things. I sued Oregon. And think about job carving. What's your biggest industry? Construction. Dangerous. High buildings, hammers. They don't even use hammers anymore. It's like staple guns, things much more deadly. Okay, cool. Are your roofers spending their time at $30 an hour picking up the extra nails and pieces of materials that are lying on the ground at the end of the day? Wouldn't you rather have them roofing? Let's think about giving someone a lower paying job that just cleans up the work site, like Q at the auto mechanic store, because I have very few stories and I just use the crap out of them. And they said, oh, you're right. And they have reached out now to the VR agency, the supported employment providers, and said, send us your people. And they also said, you know, we really are switching to on-the-job training because that whole idea that the person should get trained in advance just wasn't working for anybody. Each job site is different. Each boss is different. So we want to bring them on here and train them. We want to place and then train. It's like, oh my God, I've heard of that. So that's working, but they had no idea that there's a whole workforce waiting for them. So I think one of the barriers that you all are facing is that VR is marketed to people with disabilities and not employers. But the employers are also your customers. I try to tell them they're my customers too, but they don't, yeah. I've sued you. You're my customer. It just doesn't work. But you can pull that off. So here are some things that I learned over the past decade about enforcing, well, I was enforcing the ADA and WIOA when I was actually really trying not to learn anything about VR, but Laura made me. So because VR is a government program, it's a two-government program. I don't know how you do it. We've swamped it with regulations and paperwork and evidence-based practices with fancy names, and we've created codes. If I ever look at a 990 report again, I will die. And eligibility criteria, and on and on and on for every service. And WIOA, I'm not supposed to say WIOA, now authorizes and requires these things, but it's not actually rocket science. You know this already. Quality assurance is doing a good job and proving that you did a good job. So, and what great VR professionals do for their clients with disabilities is really a version of what we all try to do for our kids. So I hope you are measuring, I know you're measuring and paying for the outcomes you want. Competitive integrated employment that someone's going to be able to be successful at. You don't make widgets. It's not that easy. You can't just count up the numbers at the end of the day. You make full lives. So quality assurance is really important, but it's the quality of the outcome. There can be a lot more creativity in the how you get there. So change the model. People with disabilities benefit from the same tools we use for everybody else. Now you're going to hear my 16-year-old story. I was 16, I needed a job for the summer. I told my dad, who's a carpenter. I told my stepdad, who's a carpenter. I'm not going to have a lot of variety in these jobs. And I told a teacher, and I got 3 jobs. In the costume department of a theater company, at a banquet hall, and at a convenience store/diner. I was not qualified for any of these jobs. No one suggested to me that I needed to demonstrate the ability to make a Western omelet before I could work at the diner. Why were they letting me work at the diner? I still don't know how to make a Western omelet. So I wouldn't have been qualified for that job, and I would still not be qualified for that job. And no one told me I needed, this is a little stupid, no one told me I needed to know how to sew to work in the costume department at the theater company. Again, still not qualified for that one. And no one suggested that I needed to be friendly and nice to work at the banquet hall. Yes, I am still not qualified. But they gave me those jobs, and I did not get fired from any. I didn't get invited back to the diner. But I didn't get fired. But our traditional model of employment services for people with disabilities is train then place. Telling them they got to practice something until they get really good at it before they can try to get the actual job. So too often, worse, what they were practicing was not actually useful for the jobs that were available. And way too often, the thing they were practicing wasn't anything they were interested in or likely to be good at. So the train then place model wasn't working for people with disabilities any more than it would have worked for me. So why? Because you might get a job in a in a costume shop of a theater company. Really? No, not gonna do it. But by contrast, it turns out that just like the rest of us, the best predictor of post-school employment is participating in employment experiences while you're in school. But we're not using the same tools that we use for people without disabilities, for people with disabilities. So we gotta add those tools. What would you do for your kid? You would use your network. Networks are important. How did my father know anybody at the costume shop at the theater company? I don't know. But people with disabilities have had a harder time creating those networks, partly because we've been in the separate special education class, we've been in a group home, we've been in a residential institution, we've sort of been segregated, haven't had that opportunity. So that's another thing that you all and your staffs bring to the table is more networks that we can use, that we can access. So then the other thing I've learned is start early. I did not get my first work experience when I was 16. I baled hay, which taught me something, to show up on time. Because if you showed up late, you got the worst job. I babysat, which taught me I'm not gonna be a teacher. I raked blueberries, which taught me to wear a hat because sunstroke is really bad. And I fed the rabbits, the chickens, the pigs, the cow, and weed in the garden. My first jobs really taught me a lot about what I didn't want to do. Check, not gonna do that. But they taught me that showing up on time is important, that wearing a hat is important, that working means more money. The more you work, the more money you make. I love that concept. And really the hat thing is about the right equipment makes the job easier. And that hat makes you not get sunstroke, which means you can work the whole day and make more money. So having someone tell me this stuff in class, and I'm sure my parents told me this, but don't remember that, would not have stuck. Trying it, doing it, had to be learned early and in a real way, in an experiential way. Because if I had had to learn to show up on time and use the right tool, while also learning how to make a Western omelet, smile and be nice, and so I couldn't have done it. And then what I also learned, and what we also have to really take to heart, is that failure is okay. We too often use the first job that a person with a disability gets as the test of their employability. So the fact that I was not a good waitress and a really bad cook meant I wasn't employable, meant I would never be a lawyer because I couldn't do those things that were my first job. We know that's not true. I learned so much on the first job, even the one that I was not invited to return to. I'm almost certain the lesson was not that I was unemployable or that I'd be good at everything. So failure's okay. It gets you on a different path. And then there are these great cool tools with fancy names to help. Discovery, I love that tool. It's really what my father did when he got me the theater company job. He said, "What do you like to do?" I said, unhelpfully, "Read." He said, "Oh God." "What are you reading?" I said, "Shakespeare." He got me a job with a Shakespeare theater company. I had meant, I want to read for a living. He said, "This is as close as we can come." But that's discovery. What do you like to do? What are you good at? Let's take something from that and try and reveal it in your job, incorporate it in your job. But the other thing is, like everyone, people with disabilities have to take the job that's available. I couldn't get the reading job. I have the reading job now, but I couldn't get the reading job. There was no reading job. I had to take the sort of related to reading job. You have to know what the jobs are in the market, in the community. We have to be prepared to take those. And even if those core industries are out of reach or may seem out of reach, like the medical supplies industry in coastal Washington, the construction industry in Oregon, there are jobs that allow job carving, there are jobs that allow pieces of jobs to be put together that really help. Wow, I talk a lot. Employers are our customers. Even when I sue them, sometimes they go, "Oh, you really helped us." I go, "Oh, shoot, I didn't ask for enough." But that means somehow you have to figure out quality assurance of marketing. How do you judge the quality of marketing your services to the employers? How do you judge the creativity, the quality of the creativity that's involved in that? How do you judge the quality of the persuasiveness and the networking and the hustle that requires? I think that's really hard, but that's what's really great. And I talked to all these service providers who had transitioned from sheltered workshops to competitive integrated employment. The updates were successfully initiated on this computer in case anyone cares. And what they said was, you know, we've really started hiring people who were good at customer service and customer relations because they could sell it, they could persuade, they could smile. They didn't sell it as charity. They didn't ask you to hire a person with a disability. They told you why this was going to be good for you, and they said, "I'll back it up. We have resources to back it up. We can make it work." And then one of the other things I learned was that people have been sold a load of misinformation on benefits and why benefits should be maintained at all costs, even if you're giving up a higher paying job. And the safety net is not safe. It's a cage. So everybody, in every settlement that we did, we required benefits planners, good ones. If you said, "Yeah, you're gonna lose your benefits, you should stay where you are," you were fired. You gotta do the numbers. You gotta know how it plays out. You gotta know how it plays out in your state. But every one of those people who moved from sheltered work to competitive integrated jobs changed their lives because they took a risk. But they took a calculated risk because we talked to them about what it meant and took down some of the misinformation that they'd been given. And as a result, they gave up the safety net and they did all the things that we all do. They bought a house, they got married, they got a dog, they got a bed, they bought a car. One of my clients bought his car and got his first parking ticket on the day we announced the settlement agreement. And he was so proud of it. "This is my first parking ticket, and I can pay it." So anyway, these are the same things. This is the way benefits planning can help you take that risk, but know that it's a reasonable risk. And finally, I think one of the biggest hurdles to my career was that I didn't have any role models for what I wanted to do. And role models are important. So no one in my family had gone to college. Everybody was a carpenter. My mom was a waitress. I had to go on faith that I didn't have to be the seamstress in the costume shop, which is also only a summer job. I had to go on faith that I could go to college and get a career based on who was my role model? Mary Tyler Moore. Best role model ever for me. But she's not a great role model for people with disabilities or for people who don't look like her. So one of the most helpful things we found in our work for helping people with disabilities move into competitive integrated employment and for their families was to help them see what it would look like for someone like them, ideally for someone who had had the same experience as them. And so every sheltered workshop we transitioned involved having peers come back and talk to them about what they were doing, what bumps in the road they encountered, how they got over those bumps, how their lives had changed, and especially, this was really important, how they made new friendships and kept the old ones. So many people didn't want to leave their segregated employment because they would lose their friends. And I've felt that. I know exactly what that feels like. So how did you keep your friends? And how did you make new ones? So important. really the practical stuff was magical. And we paid those peer supporters because it's a job. If you're not going to get paid for doing this stuff, then you should get to go do something fun. So finally, don't forget self-employment. Sometimes the best boss is me. I am such a good boss. But mostly, the gig economy is really changing what employment means. So we're no longer going to be the people who stay 20 years at one place. We're going to do lots of little jobs through an app. So people with disabilities, we have to make our systems flexible enough to deal with the gig economy. It's coming. And those jobs have great possibilities. Flexible hours, flexible locations. If I have trouble getting dressed in the morning, I don't have to. I'm working in my house. But that's one of the barriers that traditional VR programs are going to have to take into account. How do I switch into this gig economy? And how does that's another one of those areas like Laura was talking about where we really have to cross silos here. Because how is that kind of work, which is not employment, which doesn't have benefits, which doesn't have any of the safety net features that traditional employment did, how does that play out for people with disabilities? How does that affect your Medicaid? How does that affect your other benefits? Really important, and I'm not sure we have a lot of expertise. I don't, maybe you guys do. But getting all those people in the room to understand how to make that work is going to be really important. So, oh, so good. In closing, I know you've been waiting for that. I am absolutely honored to have been invited to speak to y'all as we look forward and work together to bend that arc. But I want to say this is not the first civil rights struggle, and it's not all that different from the others. So we have models to draw on. And because of that, I want to close with the words of President Obama, this is not political, at the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, because it's meaningful for what we do as well. He said, Selma teaches us, because I'm not inspirational, but he had his moments. Selma teaches us that action requires that we shed our cynicism. For when it comes to the pursuit of justice, we can afford neither complacency nor despair. We do a disservice to the cause of justice by intimating that bias and discrimination are immutable, or that discrimination is inherent in our society. To deny our progress would be to rob us of our own agency, our responsibility to do what we can to make America better. This is work for all Americans, not just some. All of us are called to, get away from me, to possess moral imagination. All of us will need to feel the fierce urgency of now. All of us need to recognize that change depends on our actions, our attitudes, the things we teach our children. And if we make such effort, no matter how hard it may seem, laws can be passed, and consciences can be stirred, and consensus can be built. Because we are the people who will shake the system until the law reflects the truth. Because the single most powerful word in our democracy is the word we. We the people. We shall overcome. Yes, we can. And for the disability community, nothing about us without us. It is owned by no one. It belongs to everyone. Oh, what a glorious task we are given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours for people with disabilities and their communities. Thank you all so much.
Wow, I think that was really terrific. You've in my mind, touched on so many things that reflect the work that we do. And I think part of it is the framing of our part in the larger whole and all of the key pieces. So I do hope that as you sat there and listened to her remarks, you thought about your states, thought about the work that you do each and every day, what you're doing well, what more we can do for the people that we work with. And part of what I was thinking about, Eve, too, is I've often thought about our work as an evolution. I would also argue it's a revolution. So thank you. So, evaluations, use the app. There are paper copies out on the table. CRCs, if you need those signed, at the door. Nice break for until, I think, quarter of the hour, and then concurrent sessions. There's some awesome things going on, so enjoy the rest of your morning. Thank you, everyone.